Take it. A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shubhra Bandyopadhyay. I write poetry in Bengali. I have 4 published books of poetry. The 5th one is ready, will be ready very soon. And one of the 4 books got Sahitya Akademi Yuva Puraskar in 2013 for Bengali. And I also write in another language, that's Spanish. That language is my profession as well. And I have 3 poetry books published in Spain and in Chile. Thank you, Sahitya Academy. Thank you, SAARC Literary Forum, for inviting me to this prestigious event, and moreover, for giving me the opportunity to speak in this forum, My Time, My Writing. In my case, it'll be like My Time, My Poetry. It is perhaps a duty for every it is perhaps a duty for every writer to understand his or her own time within a big universal calendar, where the dates, the furthest they get, more relevant they become, at least in the literary works. But carrying on this duty consciously is the most perplexing task. Nobody knows the elements of contemporary can get a place in the great almanac or not. And there is no fixed formula for that either. What time does to a person is a mystery. So finding art in the time that we live, discover it or create it, is the primary task. As a student of poetry, I am more fascinated by the eternal choices of the great poets in the history. But they also remind me of their minor contemporaries who, after treating the same time and subject, could not outlive the test of time. And some of them also remind the emergence and rediscovery of the disappeared ones. The very first sample of Bengali poetry that survived is Chorjapod, where the poets, without any pretension of surviving in the history, did their duty to interpret the time and space they existed in. Curiously, they were Buddhist monks, but most of the times they did not impose the doctrine while writing poetry. Probably that is the greatest lesson that we can get from them. Do not write with a preconceived notion. We all know these things. But how can I interpret my time in my poetry? After almost a millennium of written tradition, there is nothing new left for poetry, in my language at least. Every emotion is well explored, every kind of political difficulties are witnessed. Everything has its end, including change. So, what is left for a poet? Using the same linguistic sets for talking about his or her personal time? As a forever student of poetry, these are the questions that bother me. Suddenly, one fine day, I discover that I live in a fractured time where everything is fragmented. Although my emotions might be the age-old well explored, Yet my attire changed according to the time. My poetry should change as well. That was one of the basic thoughts that I had. I started reading extensively. I went through the the nearest century that was 20th century, and because I in that moment I was unhappy with the forms and subjects and with the way I was treating them with the same uh, prosody, same uh, age-old fashion of writing poetry. I discovered that throughout the history of poetry, the genre shredded many of its leaves, losing readers of a particular branch. For example, poetry does not narrate like it did in the 20th century, in the 16th century. Pardon me. The readers of narrative texts chose the prose fiction. We can give endless examples of this process of losing philosophy from philosophy until the loss of music that happened in the 20th century. A very few 20th century poets were or are songwriters. This last phenomenon caused a great loss in the readership of poetry. And this is the time when our generation started practicing the genre, late 1990s or early 2000s. A time that exposed us to many completely new external challenges. So the question was, shall we try to bring readers back, or we should try to look at newer possibilities? I must call myself as a student of a specific school of poetry. I might call it even gharana, as we do in Indian classical music, where imagination is considered as the key factor, not the superficial daily experience, where we look for some sort of transcendental value of the language, where we all remember that the unicorn or the Swarna Marich of Ramayana both were creations of poets. My readings and searching experience took me to my second language, Spanish. There also I found the similar quests. Not the daily experience, but something beyond it, which is indeed a great challenge in this non mystic period of time. And moreover, the human experience is getting more tragic. At one hand, we see a lot of new poets who try to connect to a greater audience through performance, addressing the immediacy of the contemporary. But my question remains, why a reader of poetry would look for a newspaper headline or a political slogan in poetry, since these things, since for these things there are other mediums more appropriate and more penetrating. In Spain and in Latin America, I found my Bengali Gharana mates. They are also trying to explore the new imagination and linguistic complexity. Probably in this more and more entertained world and time, we also need some cerebral interpretation of the contemporary. Not only through dry and academic way, but also through vivid imagination and with poetic sensibility that would lead us to some new discoveries. Probably through imagination, we can address and even transform some of the contemporary concerns. Perhaps the more we invest in discovering new imagery or new imaginary, I must say, we would be able to see our time and palpate it as a doctor does to his patient. My time is more global than ever. My exposure is more global than ever. So my poetry must learn to address and connect cerebrally to that globality. As the great Mexican poet Octavio Paz once wrote, and I paraphrase, reducing a literary text to a mere social document is like learning botany from Constable's paintings. I, as a humble student of poetry, would look for more fertile imagination. And as I understood throughout the history, we, the artists, or all of the art forms, really could not change anything in the outer surface. It could change only the way of looking at things. So I would look for some support from my friends who bear with me every time I come up with a more complex poem, because I do not know any other way that satisfies my process of learning this world. Thank you very much again for listening to me.
Thank you, Sukho. We are very grateful for your thoughtful paper. You spoke very well about your time and your writing. Your statement has also shed light on the speciality of your poem. Thank you and gratitude from Sahitya Academy and Foundation of SAARC Writers and Literature. Thank you very much.
Thank you.